was going to be in broadcast. And I always have the joke that I was going to be the next Diane Sawyer until I realized I talked far too fast and I wasn't going to make it on TV. But I still love the interviewing people and understanding their stories and what, the little nuggets that made them who they were, that were interesting. And then, instead of translating that into an article or of sorts, I like that in strategy, you could translate that into a creative idea for brands and make more money off of that as well than you would in journalism. And so I love that. And I'm somebody who I don't like to be boxed in to a certain subject or a certain role. I like to be fluid and be boundaryless in that way. And strategy, it gives you this, I think, the room to be exploring new subjects and new industries and clients and learn about crazy things I never thought I would. Anything from learning about fertilizers to hoagies to, medical chairs and, dog pharmaceuticals. It's all over the place. But it's all very interesting in ways that I wouldn't expect. So I never get tired of it. And so when I found kind of what it was in college, I definitely knew that was something I wanted to pursue. And right out of the gate, started internships down that path. And I've stuck with it ever since.
That's cool. So I just actually had an interview with somebody today who is straight out of college, sharp kid, looking for the first gig. And one of the questions was, why did you guys choose marketing? And I was like, he said, what do you not like about going down the marketing path? Is how he framed it. He was kind of trying to look for what are the red flags I should expect in my career. And I was like, frankly, I don't have any for you, man. I love marketing. It has been like a window to the whole world for me. Like I get to work with all these different industries in my career, figure out like what their business is. I feel like I'm on a tour of stuff constantly. And then they throw like this challenging problem they've wrestled with for years at us. And they're like, we have faith that you can maybe make progress on this that we couldn't. I mean, I don't know. I think that's an interesting puzzle to choose, I think, for a career. It's not for everybody, right? But for some it is. It sounds like that's something that you were drawn to as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. And also too, like in understanding, the depths of brands in ways that, you just go beyond surface level or what their identity looks like or what they have in the world right now. You also develop a new appreciation for what they do and why they do it, which makes me care about the brands that I work for more, which is great.
Yeah, it's like you're trying to help them articulate the best version of themselves. It's true, it's real, but it's still aspirational. And sometimes they can't even quite put a finger on what that is, but we're not inventing something new. We're just helping them see like what's already there, right?
Absolutely. And I think a part of that too, why people miss it is because it starts inside the brand too, with their internal culture. And digging in deeper into a brand and business's internal culture is one of my favorite parts of the job too, because people they think there's a separation between it when really, the brand should be like living and breathing what that brand is. It should all be synonymous with their business too. So digging and understanding how the people operate and what they love usually is where those nuggets lie of what's really special about them and getting them to see themselves in a new way as well.
Yeah. And you talked about interviews a second ago. I mean, we use data to inform our decisions on brand, I think, as you should, but the interviews they really, in my experience, it's where a lot of the fun stuff happens. It's like there's sometimes an insight from the data, or maybe the data validates, but it's that qualitative conversation and getting to know people and seeing what turns them on and what turns them off and what's painful and what's exciting. Like that really is, I think, the fun stuff. What's your experience, or how would you talk about some of your experience with these interviews where I'm sure your wheels are already spinning, just hearing some of the things that they're feeding you. And you're like, ooh, that's something that's interesting right there.
Absolutely. The research of any project is my favorite part. That I think was what I was drawn to most in strategy as a role too. And it's fun because when, we call them interviews, but really it's just more casual discussions, and clients or customers who may be tentative about talking, once you get talking, they really love talking about themselves and why they choose to buy what they do or why they choose to partner with a certain client that they do. And sometimes they'll throw you curveballs as well. Curveballs, compliments, kind of weird, maybe not safe for work comments, but you take it all and it makes it fun. And sometimes, you just make those quotes anonymous or, give them a little polish up before you put them in reports. But I think that's what makes it fun.
If you think about maybe the last 3, 4, 5 brand strategy projects that you've done and the interviews that you've gone through, are there points in the interview process where they're like the more exciting times for you? Is it early on when you're just starting to learn, or is it like midway through where you're starting to get some ideas? Is it at the end where they're like validating some of these? Like what's the most interesting part of that process for you?
Mm-hmm. I would say it's always about a few interviews in where you have a foundational knowledge of it. And now people are starting to kind of give you or dangle a few other kind of new questions or challenges that you didn't realize were at the table before. Didn't realize were there. And so when you can find those, whether there are kind of niche findings in their experience or ways that they perceive a brand that the client maybe didn't expect. I think those, when it's unexpected, are always fun. And then to dig further into, okay, well, what does that mean? Or what could that mean for how we lean into that challenge or address it in an interesting way when it comes to creative development? So I think being on the brink of those hypotheses is the most exciting part.
I 100% agree. I 100% agree. In my experience, it's like, there's a certain number of interviews that you have to get to arm you to get beyond the surface level, right? And so they're super helpful because they help you ask the better questions to that sort of middle group. And then it's towards the end of that, after the middle group is where all like the good stuff is really coming out. And then the last group, I've always personally used it as sort of like validation of like, here's some of the things I'm hearing. I'm actually trying to test a hypothesis I'm about to present, maybe a week later or something like that. And they'll tell me why it's stupid or why it works and things like that. And then oftentimes they're the ones who are like, oh, I love that idea, because they think, in some cases they think they had that idea or they've heard it before from me asking. So I 100% agree with you on that. If you were talking to someone who is coming out of school right now and they were asking for tips on how to do the interview portion of the research, are there little tips and tricks that you were either someone shared with you or you found out that it's just, this is the way it works for me? Is there anything that you would relay on to someone in that position?
Well, I think I have to go back to my journalistic upbringing, but the golden rule too, in a way, is never ask a yes or no question. It always has to be a how or a why so they can elaborate. And if they don't, always ask the why and dig a little bit further to keep on prompting. Never just stop at that first answer. You should always be able to find a prompt somewhere out of that response too, not only to dig deeper and uncover more, but also to show them that you're engaged and you're invested in that conversation and listening to really what they're saying. I'd also say don't be afraid to get playful with questions. So sometimes when I throw a curveball to them too about, one of them that I use that is sometimes tricky for people is if your brand were going to a party, what would their personality be at the party, or what's their persona, or what actor or actress most embodies them? We usually get a lot of Tom Hanks. That's a good person that people want to be. I guess trustworthy, likable guy. But those kinds of questions I think help get to it. And another one that I like too is when people are trying to visualize their vision for the future, what that progress looks like. It's what would you want a New York Times headline to say about you 5 years down the road? And just kind of switching the context of those questions usually gets to some more interesting answers. Yeah,
those are great. I think it helps people get out of their normal routines too. It helps kind of shake some stuff loose. Yeah, those are fun. Yeah. We had a client years ago ask us, they said, hey, how often do you take on a brand strategy project and you just don't land it? Like it just doesn't work. You guys get stumped. You're stumped. You still try to put something in front of the client. Everybody knows you got stumped. And it's just off and it's not right and you can't get there. He said, how often does that happen? And I was like, well, in my experience, we've yet to see that happen. So I would assume that can happen, but we haven't experienced it. And so I guess that leads me to the question of, I'm sure there's been times where you get into something that's challenging. I think they're all challenging, right? That's just what makes it interesting. Have you had that experience where you feel like I'm really stuck here? I'm torn between these different directions or whatever. Or do you always have confidence like we'll figure this out? Like we've got the frameworks and the smart people and we'll figure this out. How do you approach that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the core of my job is to have a point of view on the brand and the challenge and how you approach it. So I'm never without thoughts or a point of view, but I think what gets challenging is when you have the core, you have this, the core of this idea, but then you start to beat up language so much, or a client starts to really nitpick language. And it's like, oh, well, it's not the best way to articulate it, that you focus on the language so much of an idea or an insight, whatever that is, that it actually, you beat it out of shape. And then it starts to actually lose meaning in that, I think, that grit to an idea, because you're just so focused on what the language means, not what that conveys or what that means for the brand's point of view. So I'd say it's never arriving at the idea. That's usually the challenge. It's packaging it up in a way that's not only compelling for our teams and clients' teams, but also feels like the best way to package it up for customers.